I often say over on the other side, worked with Graham here on her PhD, and last year was appointed to the chair of, or directorship of the Centre for Scottish Studies at Simon Fraser University on the other coast of this country, or one of the other coasts of this country. I grew up, it was coast to coast, and of course that's horribly insensitive. It's coast to coast now. I have to retrain myself. I've been out of the country a long time. And it's really taking the initiative of the Centre at Simon Fraser forward in a number of different ways, and we look forward to hearing some of that today. So thank you very much, Gabriel.
Well, that's an interesting thing to find out today, that I'm part of the Guelph Mafia here.
It's spreading.
My talk here. So yeah, I came to the University of Guelph in 2007 as a master's student, and I had written a paper on the Scottish Enlightenment in my undergrad, and I got really interested in this historiography, some historiographical issues. And so I asked my professor Simon Devereux, where should I do a master's? Should I go to U of T? And he said, no, you'll go to the University of Guelph. This Scottish Studies program there. I've never heard of this place. That's the fault of where I'm from, actually. When you're from the other side of the Rockies, nowhere else exists. But I now know where the University of Guelph is, and I'm very glad that I came here. I didn't know what to expect. I really didn't know what I was walking into, and what a delightful surprise to find this well-established program with phenomenal faculty. And as Graham said, money to send us to Scotland. I couldn't believe it. I was going to research in Scotland. Some incredible opportunities. And so on I went on to a PhD. I continued to work with Graham, and I completed in 2014. So, but in that time, I made a lot of connections. So this is at the foot of Ben Loyal, and Elizabeth Ritchie has shown up in a few photos here, but she, of course, went off to the University of Highlands and Islands, the Centre for History. So I maintained my connection to Elizabeth all these years, and I visit them every time I go. And now I have that connection to Dundee through Graham. And that's, of course, Heather Parker, who many of you would know very well. So, this center not only, acts as a way to bring people together here, it helped me to expand outwards. I met tons of people in Scotland. I never felt cut off from what was going on. There was money from the College of Arts to go to conferences, right? So there was institutional support, there was support from the foundation and private lending. So what a fabulous program that I entered, and that played a large part in why I was hired at Simon Fraser University in 2015. So what did I learn? What did I take to Simon Fraser University with me? We've been talking about all these things today, and I learned from Graham, I learned from Elizabeth Ewan, and from Kevin James, who sat on my committee, and Linda Levitt. I should leave her out, she was my teaching mentor. So I learned that public engagement was crucial, right? This interplay between the academy and the public, for Scottish studies, it seems especially very important, right? We have a vested interest in this. We want to work together. Student support, right? There was that money there for us to go and research in Scotland, if need be, if you weren't using the collection here. High quality teaching and supervision, of course, right? World renowned. People have heard of this program everywhere. Research output, right? The books, the volumes that have come out of here, the output from the scholars and from students, high quality. And community support, of course, and that is where the Scottish Studies Foundation played a role, in keeping this going and building it and allowing for Scottish history to flourish, Scottish studies to flourish in Canada, not just here, and I'll get to that. So, the Centre for Scottish Studies at Simon Fraser University was founded in 1998 as a joint venture between the community and the university. So this was really a community venture, and we do rely on community support. And the focus since then, it started actually in the humanities department with Stephen Duguid, and then it went on into the literature department, my predecessor, Professor Lee Davis. who supported and put out many honors theses, master's projects, and PhDs. Jennifer Scott, who graduated in, I think, 2013, did a project on Galt, actually. So there's, again, that Trans-Canada Scottish Studies. But there was a recognition by the dean at the time, about 2012, I think was when they were thinking about it. The public really wanted to see history. And I'll get to why this is in a minute when I talk about challenges. And also there's a sense from especially the Vancouver Scottish community, that the Scottish community is dying out. And I'll get to what, there's a perception it is, but it actually isn't. And I'll show you that through different strategies, it will not die out, right? But there is that perception. Our history hasn't been written. Scots have been important to the history of Vancouver. It's quite Vancouver-centered, so I'm going to look at Vancouver Island today. Our community is dying out. People are not joining these societies anymore. Why? Right? So history was an important reason why I was hired as a historian. I'm assistant professor in the history department at Simon Fraser, and that's now where the center is. So it has a history focus. So there are some challenges to doing Scottish studies in the Pacific Northwest, right? First of all, distance. I'm quite aware now that I'm back home in British Columbia, just how far away it is. No longer that 6-hour little jaunt across the Atlantic to get to Scotland. It's a 9.5-hour slog just to London. But worth the effort, of course. But we're also very far away from these special collections. Simon Fraser University does not have a Scottish collection, does not have a Scottish archive. So there is this sense of, okay, so how are we going to do this, being so far away from these special collections? And of course, that's where we bring in the digitization issue. These are very important projects to continuing Scottish studies across the country, right? It's fabulous that Guelph has these resources. It's amazing that we're going to have a digitized version of the special collections. I'm so thrilled when I heard about that. I plan to use the Scottish Chapter Project next term, the spring term, for my Scottish family course. And I want them going there, looking at everyday lives of people reading those chapbooks, right? Amazing. They can just search it online. And also Electric Scotland, Alice's project there, we've been using that in class as well. Many different documents that students can use. And also open access. A lot of the Scottish publications coming out now are digital, and the library is able to get them either free or low charge. So I came into this job wondering, how is the library going to be? How are the Scottish secondary sources going to be? My mind is put at ease when you find ebooks being available for the students, which for them, especially if one of them is a textbook, is free, and that's really helpful for students. So what are the challenges for researching Scottish diaspora to British Columbia? So we've been talking about how do you teach Scottish studies, how do students write their essays, that kind of thing they can use, the work that's been done here and other institutions. But the issue is the history of the Scottish diaspora doesn't include British Columbia. The historiography is really missing that part of the story. A little bit has been done by Marjorie Parker. There's been a little bit of work done on Hebridean fishers coming to British Columbia. But other than that, there's no sustained investigation of this history yet. If you go to Vancouver, if you go to Vancouver Island, Scottishness is everywhere. The SFU pipe band is world renowned. There are reasons for this. Because it's a very Scottish place. The Scots came. Where are they, right? Where are they in the history? The popular histories tend to portray Scots and British Columbia as a history of great men, or there's always a laundry list, and I'll show you that laundry list in a minute. Sir James Douglas was a Scot, right? People they very enthusiastically will list those people, right? But what's the broader story? Where are the common people, right? Where are the employees of the great men and that kind of thing? And so that is the story that I'm hoping to tell as I move forward in this job and get students to tell as well as the center develops. So some strategies. In order to place the Scottish diaspora into broader settlement in British Columbia, it's necessary to start looking at transnational and transcultural contexts. The Scots came the exact same time as the Chinese, for example. They came around the time that the Sikhs were coming to British Columbia. It's more of a multicultural story in British Columbia at the time of first settlement than, say, in Ontario, where it's largely British and Irish and kind of Indigenous people. And that's also another thing. More and more people in British Columbia are identifying as Scotch Métis. That's a term that's come out now. That's, recognizing that heritage of cultural contact between, say, the former fur traders and others and Indigenous people. Just as an example, the Musqueam Nation in Vancouver, in their tribal council, there are 2 Grants and a Fraser, right? So the names are there. There's that history. It hasn't been told. So the transnational, transcultural context will help the Academy see the importance of this research, because at the moment they're a bit like, what is this? And also these transcultural contexts can help us to, as it were, save the Scottish community in Vancouver. By showing the public and the Academy that there was cultural blending, cultural fusion that continues to this day, we can elevate the profile of that history in the broader discussion. So here's some of that laundry list, of course, right? To a BC audience, you would know who these people are, perhaps you don't. But Sir James Douglas, of course, the former Hudson's Bay Company, a bigwig, sets up the settlement of Fort Victoria in 1843. There he is. He's always very stoic. He oversees the formation of the colony of Vancouver Island, the colony of British Columbia, and sees their unification in 1864. So, he's sort of, everyone pulls him out. He was a Scot. Well, he was a British Guyanan, actually. He was born in British Guyana, had a Creole mother, and he was educated in Scotland. So, a Scot, yes, but a man of empire, right, at the time. William Fraser told me, Glasgow trained physician. There's a mountain named after him. First mayor of Vancouver, people whipped him out too. He was a Gaelic speaker, right? And Robert Dunsmuir, the pole bearer, and I'll get to him in a minute. Charles Ross, another Hudson's Bay Company fur trader. I throw him up because I grew up in Ross Bay in Fairfield. They've just finished refurbishing his home there, which is really lovely. And Sir James Douglas, Charles Ross, and many others were married to Métis women that they met in the fur trade. So that little slice of the story has been told. Sylvia Van Kirk has written about that. But again, they're not portrayed as Scots. They're fur traders. Right? And there's always the explorations, right? 2 explorations by the Northwest Company that everyone's kind of heard of, right? Alexander Mackenzie is sent out, find that Northwest Passage. And Simon Fraser, he's set out to find the mouth of the Columbia. Instead, he finds the river that now bears his name. He now sits at the New Westminster Quay along the river. This was an impromptu picture. I went, there he is, because I've been looking for the statue. In a 1911 travel book, it said it was up on this hill. I went up there, condo development was there. And I thought, oh no, they've taken it away. And then we were heading down to the quay for dinner, and I said, there he is. So he sits along the river there. But these are the things that are really whipped out when you talk about Scots and BC, the exploration. Simon Fraser himself has an entire history in Ontario, 42 years that nobody's written about, but I will be. That's my current project right now. So how do we get to these commoners? How do we get to the regular folks that came to British Columbia? It's not going to be as hard as I thought it was. It's going to be difficult because it's going to require a lot of data and comparing data. But in the censuses from 1871 onwards, you find where are you born? Scotland, right? Where are you born? Scotland. You find what they do for a living. So there we go. We have that evidence there that hasn't been used. Birth registers, school records, who's on the honor roll. The only problem with some of the school records is Scots and English aren't differentiated. They'll often be just called British. That was a phenomenon of British Columbia more than anything. British Columbia Directory and voter lists. They're there. The Scots are there. We can find them. I will hire students to put that all in a nice big spreadsheet for me of some kind. And we'll get a snapshot that we can then compare with other census projects that are taking place, comparing the data with Scotland, and start to look at why people left. There's another sort of stereotype of Scots and BC is that they came from Ontario. So as they came from somewhere else. Well, actually, many of them came directly to British Columbia. Something you may not know, we have a very historic Gaelic community, especially from the Isle of Lewis. There were two waves of Lewis settlement, late 19th century and the 1920s. One estimation says that about 22,000 Gaelic speakers were in the Pacific Northwest in the 1920s. And the Gaelic Society of Vancouver has been around since 1908. It's still going. The group gets a bit smaller, but they're still there. They're Gaelic speakers. There's many a McCullough in Vancouver, let me tell you. So one of our digitization projects that we have is the Scottish Voices from the West. So this is another very useful project that people can use from anywhere. So about 20 interviews were made of Scottish immigrants to British Columbia or descendants of Scottish immigrants to try and get a sense of the post-war settlement. Why did people come here, or why did their grandparents come here? So this is a valuable oral history collection that will be searchable. Admittedly, the library hasn't uploaded all the oral history projects yet, but it's ready to go, and that will be where you can search it. And the most famous Isle of Lewis settler that came to Vancouver, Murdomy Heber, who passed away this year, his interview is really worth listening to. He was an amazing guy, and I'm so glad I got to meet him before he passed away. He was really a pillar of the Gaelic community in Vancouver. So Scots, when they come to British Columbia, as I said, they come early, and they come to these first settlements that were popping up, these white and Asian settlements that were popping up in British Columbia, and then living amongst the Indigenous people who they worked with. Fort Victoria is the first, Nanaimo, New Westminster, and then the Mid-Island, Cumberland, Comox Valley. Right? So Fort Victoria makes sense. It was the main settlement. Vancouver is a bit late. It's later than this, right? People think Vancouver is one of the first. It's actually New Westminster was the capital of the colony of British Columbia. Predating. So again, when you talk about early Victorian history, you whip out the old Hudson's Bay Company fort, and there it is. But we're interested here in just a small slice of the story, and it's coal mining. Because the Hudson's Bay Company, when they found the coal seams in Nanaimo, almost immediately sent for Scottish miners. They came from Ayrshire, and they came to mine the coal seam found there. So the Hudson's Bay Company targeted an ethnic group, which I think is really interesting. Probably had a lot to do with the fact that many of the company officers were themselves Scottish. Well, our miners are out of work, maybe they'll come here, right? We're in an economic slump in Scotland in the mid-19th century, so they would have been looking for work, and off they went. And as I've been looking through, just to take a step back for a second, I've been looking through the census to see, what were they doing? And Scots were occupied in every resource and light manufacturing industry and politics and law that we find in British Columbia. Again, this is stuff they were trained for back in Scotland, or stuff they were willing to do as they came to British Columbia. So you can see it all there, the fishing, the shipbuilding. John Sherry, who was a postdoc here some years ago, his uncle came to North Vancouver to build ships, right? He learned in Glasgow, they were building ferries in North Vancouver, off he went, right? There's stories like that all around, and again, hasn't been captured. And something that I'm really interested in finding, hopefully, is because we do have a lot of Hebridean Islanders coming to Vancouver, were they targeted for certain industries? Fishing, we do know. There were schemes by both the Canadian government and the British government to, deal with the Hebridean Islanders who appeared to be, not doing anything at the time in the late 19th century and into the 1920s. So we know they came out for fishing, but we do find a lot of Scots in forestry and mining as well. So as Scots do, wherever they go, they set up their clubs. And British Columbia was no exception. We find the same kinds of clubs and societies that we get here in Ontario popping up all over the place and becoming important parts of the community and supporting the Scottish settler communities across the island and into the lower mainland. So the oldest was the Victoria, St. Andrews and Caledonia Society, which went defunct in 2014. So again, we talk about loss of a community. That was a real hit to the Victoria Scottish community. Oh no one's joining, or people are passing away. That's it, we're done. But it's not. There's hope on the horizon. The New Westminster Caledonian Society, not sure when it starts, but it's early. It will then morph into the Vancouver St. Andrews and Caledonian Society, and that's still going to the present. So the St. Andrews and Caledonian Society sponsor a yearly lecture for us. So we have that coming up in October. And so that's the kind of community support that we need, and that's there for international speakers to come. We have the Nanaimo Caledonian Society. It wasn't clear in the papers to me when it began, but maybe 1880s, just after the miners come in larger numbers. And Caledonian societies, lots of Highlanders perhaps. And it goes defunct in the 90s at some point. And Cumberland, I'm just so determined. Someone's got those papers. I went to Cumberland this summer and I kept hearing, oh, maybe Joe's got them, or they're not in the archive. But I got enough references to find that it was around for about 100 years. And again, it's that mining community. This was actually sent to me from a former prophet, Vic, who said, well, I think Katie's doing something Scottish. This looks Scottish. So this was the beginning of the St. Andrews Society of Victoria, which met downtown in 1859. And who do we find there, right? His excellent Governor Douglas. Right? So this could have been the Victoria Scottish Mafia, right? So some of the names there are not Scottish, of course, but like with these societies and burgeoning communities, when they are when the Scots are dominant, and you want to get somewhere in the city, probably going to socialize with them, right? So very common in these colonial societies. The Sons of Scotland Benevolent Association has been the most successful in the Lower Mainland, and there are reasons for that. They've had many different camps. They are still going in the Lower Mainland. On the island, they didn't last very long. And there are some reasons for that. They went beyond supporting the Scottish community to supporting lots of charitable projects. So they've been going on with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, for example. And they donated a student prize to our program, which I was able to give out this year to a deserving student. So again, that community support for students is coming from the community. Recognizing that something new is happening in the center, finally teaching Scottish history courses that's new. They want to support that. Highland Games #1, and this is where we get to there's some positives coming out of some of these efforts for Scots to preserve their culture in British Columbia. There is some dispute whether or not Vancouver or Victoria is the oldest. Victoria is the oldest. I'm not just saying that because I'm from Victoria, but it's been the longest running and probably the oldest Highland Games. And in this way, we can see that actually British Columbia is some of the oldest continually running Highland Games in Canada. So again, what does that tell us? The Highland Scottish element is probably pretty strong in British Columbia, so let's dig into that. So the New Westminster Games, which was sponsored by the Sons of Scotland Benevolent Association, will morph into the BC Highland Games from the 1930s. So New Westminster is another place where you see the Scottishness pull away, and what are the reasons for that? It's one of the earlier settlements. Other than Victoria, the early settlements, we see the Scottish community fall away. Now the BC Highland Games is every year in Colloquium, and it's one day, and they're going to add another day, and I'll get to that at the end. I just really love this float because it simultaneously freaks me out, but I love it. But the Sons of Scotland Games in New Westminster, they were big. They brought in, you know, parades. It was a big deal to the city of New Westminster. They still have one of the most well-attended burn suppers, actually, in the Lower Mainland. So again, the community's there in one form or another, but let's find out, you know, why it's changed. So the New Westminster Archives is one of those, I think way back where I was talking about how do we get at Scots, I think I forgot to mention that the local archives are very rich in British Columbia, and there are a lot of them. The New Westminster Archives especially, they have tons of Scottish material, right? The Royal Engineers that came and mapped out the city, a lot of them were Scottish, right? And went on to become civil engineers in other parts of the province. So they were known as the Sappers. I actually live in Sapperton, so it's the town of the Royal Engineers. But so we can, you know, students can actually, from SFU, very nearby, can use these archives to look at Scots in BC. And I have had my students use that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But a place where we definitely see, or what appears to be community collapse, is in the Mid-Island, where those mining towns were from the mid-19th century onwards. I put a map up just in case you had no idea where Cumberland was. But, so this is the Comox Valley, right, and then there's Nanaimo. So this is where the rich coal seams were, lots of coal mining. And Robert Dunsmuir, the coal baron, another one from the laundry list, right? So he's who's talked about when we talk about coal mining, but who did he employ? What were those people doing? We know they were socializing, but we also know they were settling. And in these early years of settlement into the Mid-Island, the majority of the settlers were Scottish. They live alongside Chinese as well, who were coming into doing ancillary activities to the coal mining, such as the laundries and the stores. Bevan, for example, which no longer exists, was almost wholly a Scottish town. And the Comox Valley today and Nanaimo, you go around and the street names are largely Scottish. You know, Wallace Street in Nanaimo. Nanaimo is this incredibly Scottish town, but yet, right, where did the Scots go? Did they die out? We're not sure. And Cumberland is amazingly Scottish. People I was talking to in the area, the archive's not very rich, unfortunately, because I think someone's hoarding the material. Who knows? I'll find out. But this is such a Scottish town. This is such a Scottish town. The anecdotal evidence is surely there from those who are descended from the miners, especially. And in the Mid-Island, we have lots of other types of places for cultural expression where you find Scots. I found many pamphlets of Highland dancers, pipers, in places like Victoria Day parades, folk festivals, and Empire Days, which was an important part of the Cumberland social calendar. I don't know if you really get it. Cumberland is basically a street, right? It's a very small, it's still a village, I believe. But yet they had these Empire Days that brought people in from the small towns across the island. Another sort of stereotype of Vancouver Island especially is this very British, right? So when I grew up in Victoria, the Victoria Day Parade was the highlight of the year, and the folk festival highlighted things like British food, which as a kid was kind of exciting. And it got more and more multicultural as it went on. Now it's a food truck festival. But they had these folk festivals in places like Nanaimo and Cumberland. And people were very proud of including lots of different cultures that lived in the area, including the Scots. So Nanaimo, that Scottish town, right? You go into what's known as McGregor Park. There's commemorations. But again, where did they go, right? So the Highland Games Nanaimo, as I showed you, lasted for about 100 years or so. But in the 70s, they stopped running them all the time. And there just wasn't funding for it. The broader community didn't really see the point, perhaps. They didn't, maybe they were just not that excited about it. It's really, again, it's unclear. This is from my first survey of the archives that I've been looking at. But they were welcomed back in 77. I guess they were canceled in 76. And, a little bit of money was found to have the games go on. And again, Nanaimo's a small place. I think now it's about 10,000 people less than Guelph. No, it's about 80,000. It's much smaller than Guelph. But what was known as the Nanaimo Highland Games, or the Upper Highland Games, were, for a long time, very popular events. They brought in performers from everywhere. What's really interesting is I found Jack Lee performing the Pibroch, and he, of course, is one of the famous SFU pipers. So you find these famous dancers and pipers at the Nanaimo Highland Games, because that was part of their circuit. There was Nanaimo, Victoria, and then Vancouver, and Seattle, actually. So there was even an organization that brought them all together. I just love sorry, they're not very clear. Again, I was taking the photos very quickly, so I had to bust the patch, but that's the mayor of Nanaimo in the 70s on the left. I'm not sure if he's wearing a tartan jacket because he's at a Scottish event, or it's just the 70s. I'm not sure. But he seems very excited to try that haggis. So, the Scottish community there tried to, advertise what they were doing. They tried to get the broader community interested. But unfortunately, they don't. And I found this letter to the editor where somebody was complaining that the Nanaimo's Victoria Day Parade didn't include the Scots. This is in '79. Where in hell were our kilties? Ever since I was a child, I have thrilled to the skirl of the pipes, and I sorely missed them yesterday. I'm sure I was not alone in my disappointment, right? So, that's Mrs. Harlan Hushman's opinion, but I don't think she would have been alone. It may have seemed a bit empty after all those years of pipers and such being involved. And then at some point in the 80s, the Highland Games, they just end. But I think if they'd only kept including the tartan pillow fighting, maybe it would have kept going. This is my ultimate favorite find I've ever found in the archives. This actually was an event in the Nanaimo Highland Games in the 70s, tartan pillow fighting. So, I don't know, maybe if they kept that going, right? So, death of a community, right? The Vancouver Scots are worried this is going to happen. The St. Andrews and Caledonian Society Victoria died. What do we do here? So, yes, these original settlements of Scots, it appears perhaps the communities did die in Nanaimo and the Comox Valley. But, there were reasons for that. Unfortunately, in these really small towns, and again, this was just from interviewing locals, they felt that the Scots were too insular in these small towns. They didn't invite others to their meetings of Caledonian societies and whatnot, whereas they did in Victoria and Vancouver, and Nanaimo as well. It was the same deal. Not inviting young people, not inviting outsiders may have led to the collapse of these societies, because you just don't get those extra people, those who are interested in Scottish culture, if you keep them out. However, more recently, and these were the people I was talking to who are trying to knit the community back together, we have Vancouver Scots coming and retiring in the area. It's a beautiful place to retire, so some of the Vancouver Scots are breathing new life into these communities. We have Scottish country dancing, doing very well in Nanaimo. We have piping in Courtney, and these are doing well and people are interested. But we need new strategies. It's a time for Scottish communities in British Columbia to try something new, and that includes cultural blending, much the way that the province has been since settlements on Indigenous land, and also including those Indigenous people they encountered. And there's a really interesting guy who's a former SFU student, and his name is Todd Wong, but he goes by Toddish McWong, and he has burn suppers he calls Gung Haggis Fat Toy Robbie Burns dinners. And as a student, Todd, or Toddish, discovered the importance of not only his own family's heritage to the formation of the development of British Columbia, but also the Scottish, and he was really interested in that. And he's kind of famous around the area because it's something very different, but it's something people can really get behind. They're very excited about it. Also, what has become extremely popular, and this happens at the Surrey Fusion Festival, and also what they plan to have Bhangra Highland Fusion dancing at the BC Highland Games moving forward. It's really something to watch. I encourage you to Google the Bhangra Highland Fusion dancing. It just somehow works perfectly. It's amazing. All the sounds and the colors, really beautiful. And so, you know, in the academic realm, let's start comparing Scots with other groups that they settled with. In the community, in our public engagement, in presenting Scottish culture, let's integrate, let's fuse with other interested parties. And of course, one of the biggest games in North America, it's a 3-day event, Victoria Highland Games. They had new management come together as the Victoria Highland Games Association. They put away all the old hang-ups, they're embracing other cultures. The food is multicultural, they're going to have more Indigenous presence and that kind of thing. It doesn't disrupt Scottish culture to involve others, it only brings more people interest. And in British Columbia, piping has never been more popular. Highland dancing has never been more popular. Lots of children are involved. They like the discipline of drumming, that kind of thing. Parents want to get them involved in these pipe bands. So that's the positive we can take away from this. So I took what I learned here about public engagement, about research. I'm going to apply it as best I can, to the Centre for Scottish Studies and get people thinking more about these broader issues. And so I was talking to Mike Chisholm, who's the special events director of the BC Highland Games Scottish Festival. And he says our Scottish Festival would expand to welcome other cultures to celebrate together a unique Canadian cultural fusion of music, song, and dance. And I think that's what it's all about, and I look forward to that. My students, they've been putting out research for me in my classes. These are actually male Highland dancers at the New Westminster Highland Games in the 1930s. I just love the mustaches. But this is the research blog of the Centre. This is where you can find biographies of the less known Scots, the lesser known ones. We have a Mexican outlaw up there. We have an actress from New Westminster. I took the students to the New Westminster archives, panicked they would find nothing, and it was no problem. They were there, the Scots were there, stories could be told. So I will be doing that moving forward. Please follow us at the Centre for Scottish Studies. Thank you so much.